Hi everyone, I'm Heather Danton and welcome to our podcast series. I work at the University for Queensland, establishing our First Nations research network. I'm a Bardi woman and I'm part of developing the podcast series, Nurturing Knowledge, Indigenous Health Research Stories in Podcasts. I'd like to start the podcast by acknowledging country and the various countries from where our listeners are located, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge the ongoing contributions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait peoples to society at local, national and international levels. I also want to acknowledge that we are recording has already been a place of teaching and learning. I also want to acknowledge that where we are recording has always been a place of teaching and learning. Our guest today is Professor Dawn Besserab, who's the Director for the Centre for Aboriginal Medical and Dental Health at the University of Western Australia. Would you introduce yourself in whatever way you feel comfortable?
Hi everyone, my name's Dawn Besserab. I'm based at the University of Western Australia and am the Director for the Centre for Aboriginal Medical and Dental Health, which is located within the medical program, and we teach Aboriginal health into the medical program. I'm a Bard Yindjarbarndi woman, so Bard from my father's side in Ardiulan, or One Arm Point on the Dampier Peninsula, and Yjindjarbandi from my mum's side from around the Millstream area. I'm also a social worker, a senior social worker, and have been working in the research space for a very long time now. I graduated with my PhD from Curtin back in 2007. After completing my PhD, I went automatically into research, and particularly in the area of health research, where previous to that, my background was within the human services field, working across a range of different areas such as child protection, family violence, drug and alcohol, the justice system. When I went into health research, when I was approached to become involved in health research, I kind of thought, I don't really have a health research background. I don't really know very much about the health space. But after being in that health space for a while, I realised I actually knew a lot more than I thought I did, because in health, we talk about the social determinants of health and the determinants which contribute to poor health outcomes in Aboriginal people. In the child protection and the human services field, those are all the areas that we work across in relation to the sorts of determinants which bring Aboriginal people into contact with the criminal justice system or the child protection system. And so while we didn't call them social determinants at that point, I was very familiar with all of those different determinants, which in research, when we start to study some of those areas to find out some of the causes behind, or to provide more information about what's happening for Aboriginal people in relation to specific health areas, that starts to make a lot of sense. So that was kind of my introduction into the research space.
First question we ask people is, what inspired you to pursue a career in research, in health research?
In some ways, I kind of fell into it, but in another way, one of my social work lecturer, who actually encouraged me to do research when I was studying social work at Curtin, in my final year, she suggested to me that I do my honours. And that was the first time I'd heard about, a degree, a research postgraduate degree called honours. And I said to her, what is that? Because that would never have occurred to me to even think about that. And she explained it to me and said, you can do it as part of your fourth year before you graduate. So I thought, well, why not? Because there were a number of things that I was experiencing on a personal level, and one was around Aboriginal identity. And I think all of us have experienced this, where because we may not fit the standard characteristics of what is considered to be an Aboriginal person, for instance, I don't have very dark skin, and I don't have all of those sort of facial characteristics, I would often get questioned about, who are you or what are you? And when I would identify as Aboriginal, they'd go, well, no, you're not, and because you don't look Aboriginal. So I thought, what is it about my finding it really important to maintain my identity as an Aboriginal person when I didn't look Aboriginal. So that was my first research. That inspired me to go and find out a bit more to answer this question, because I thought, if I'm experiencing this, how many other people are having similar experiences? From that, I graduated with first class honours, and it didn't stop there, because I thought, well, that's the end of the research project. It was very interesting. I found out a lot of things which were important. But research is also empowering, because the honours project empowered me through the findings. There wasn't anything wrong with me. It helped me to flip the lens back to actually asking the people who were questioning my identity about, why did they think I didn't look Aboriginal? What was their understanding of what an Aboriginal person is? Whereas before that, I used to feel very disempowered. That kind of is an inspiration for other research projects, is that research can be very empowering for us on a personal level, but it can also be empowering for our own community, because it helps us to shed light on the question and to provide some other understandings and meanings into why certain things happen in the way that they do. I ended up graduating, went back into the field to work as a social worker, but my lecturer didn't let go. She kept coming after me and saying, well, why don't you think about doing your PhD? I was like, oh, I'm sick of academia. I want to do some practice. But after a while practicing, I found that I was starting to get bored intellectually. And so then I thought I would apply for a scholarship, because I had first class honours. I was able to apply for a higher education scholarship, and was successful. And that led me into doing my PhD. And from there, my PhD then led me into research. I was then approached by other researchers asking if I would come and be engaged on their research projects. But before I even started doing my postgraduate degree, I was, as a community person, I was approached by researchers to sit on their research as a community member in terms of an Indigenous advisory capacity. So I was already getting involved in research through those sort of community channels. But once I got the higher degree, that gave me authority, because I found that prior to that, people wouldn't listen to what I said. But when I got a doctorate, you become an expert, some authority, which really shouldn't matter, but it does. Working within certain areas, I wasn't being taken seriously, but once I got my PhD, that gave me authority. And I think that's really important, and why it's really essential for Aboriginal people to get a postgraduate degree, because it does give you, and it shouldn't have to, but it does.
What cultural values or teachings from your community have guided you towards a career in health research?
I can remember when I was young, around 10 or 11 years old, and having family elders visit my parents, and they're all sitting around the kitchen table yarning. And, as kids, we'd sort of hang around in the background eavesdropping, even though they tell us to take a hike. But I do recall they were talking about a suicide of one of our family members that had happened in Broome. And that was the first time I'd ever heard the word suicide. And the conversation around the table was such that we don't understand enough about the white man's, and we need more of our young people to go into the education and get an education to understand what is going on here. Why are these things happening? And I didn't really think about that too much, but over the years and reflection, I think that was the first time that the seeds were sown for me around, one, the importance of education, but two, asking questions about, problems that are happening in our community, because what they were saying then was that the Aboriginal, the cultural stuff wasn't enough to understand what was happening here. They said, they were talking about how the world was changing, and, being part of the white man's world, there were now things happening that couldn't be addressed or solved in the Aboriginal way. They needed to understand. And I think what they were talking about, even though they didn't articulate that, was, what was the biomedical, what was going on there on another level. The cultural stuff is important, but sometimes the problems can't always be solved with purely a cultural approach because there is something else going on. So I guess the first thing was the importance of finding out, getting another worldview on what's going on. Other values have been respect. My senior uncle, who's passed on now, when I expressed an interest in him as a young woman wanting to go back to Ardiulan to find out more about culture, he said to me, when you know about culture, you learn how to survive. Through research, we have found that to be true, because what we're knowing now from research that's been done around social and emotional well-being in North America, in Canada, and which a lot of the work that Professor Pat Dudgeon's been doing around SEWB and suicide, we know that the evidence is now there which supports what we've always known, is that culture is integral to survival and that it helps to build people's social and emotional well-being, their confidence and their self-esteem, and also it kind of erases that colonial experience which tried to demean who we were as a First Nations people and to demean our First Nations knowledge and ways of doing things. So there's been little seeds planted along the way by elders in my family and the community that have laid the foundation in terms of cultural values, cultural knowledge and cultural ways of knowing, being and doing as being integral to doing good research.
Can you share any personal or professional goals you have set for yourself as a health researcher?
Right back when I first started to think about getting an undergraduate degree, I realised that I didn't have the proper qualifications to work out in the broader community if I wanted to work and addressing some of the issues with our mob. So the first goal that I set was I need to go to university and get a proper qualification. And social work seemed the most obvious pathway, but it was also Carol Martin, who was one of our first Indigenous members to Parliament. She graduated with her social degree. She was from Derby, and she was the one that kind of led me into social work and said, come and meet Frank Crawford, who was my lecturer, the one who was the guiding person in doing my honours and my PhD. So I wanted to have a qualification because I felt that people weren't listening to me as a community person, and I was being challenged for my Indigenous knowledge, even though I was employed to provide direction and advice to social workers around how you work more culturally safe with Aboriginal people. They still saw me as not being equivalent to where they were at because they had the degree and I didn't. So my first goal was to get an undergraduate degree to see whether that made a difference in terms of my authority. And then once I got my degree, I found that, I still had to prove myself. And I think we still do. It doesn't matter how qualified we are. And this is part of that colonial system, which says, Aboriginal people are not as good as non-Aboriginal people. So, I didn't let that undermine me, but it was just something to be mindful of that, we're still challenged. Do we have a Mickey Mouse degree? But anyway, putting that to one side, my goals were then to get my research to go on and to work with, I wanted to be graduated because I was a mature age student. By the time I was in my 30s, I wanted to have an undergraduate degree. Then I did my honours. By the time I was 40, I wanted to have my doctorate. Yes, my track record my run was a bit late. That's why I think it's really important for young people now to try and get your studies under your belt while you're young and to build your track record because you've got a longer run in than someone like myself who was a mature age student, because, my track record is sort of getting to the point where it is built, but I'm also getting ready to exit. I'm close to retirement. That kind of guided my goals, and also talking to people and seeing my work experience and seeing what was lacking out there in the sector and what was needed. And also a lot of partnerships and working with non-Indigenous colleagues who were supportive. So the partnership aspect of working with non-Indigenous people was also a support system, which helped me to build on my Indigenous background.
So what would you say to your 16 or 17-year-old self about choosing a career direction?
If I could go back, I'd probably look at things differently. My 16 or 17-year-old, growing up in Broome, there was no university in Broome. We were never given any direction from the high school. I saw the principal talking to non-Indigenous students who'd done their juniors, but no one ever had a conversation with me or had a conversation with my parents about what I could be and what I could do. So looking back, I think I would tell my 16 or 17-year-old to be confident, to find out what is available in the system, because back then, we didn't even know that there was universities where you could go and get a higher degree or you could go and get a degree. Plus, I remember when my parents sent me down to Perth to do my leaving, and that was a big transition because when I went down, the whole curriculum changed. So what I'd learnt in Broome had suddenly shifted, and I was learning new subjects like maths 1, 2 and 3, and all of that, which we'd never learnt in Broome. So that was a struggle for me. But when I went to university thinking I wanted to be a physiotherapist, actually, but when I rocked up at Curtin, I went to the mainstream and they looked at me and said, you don't have the right subjects. And that was very disheartening. But at that point, no one said there's been a Centre for Aboriginal Studies established, go over and speak to them. I didn't even know there was a centre. So I think for a 16, 17-year-old, because you don't have all that knowledge, unless your parents are locked into the system, they don't know that either. So I guess the 16, 17-year-old, sometimes it's hard to know what you want to do. Look at people around you, and if you're impressed by what they're doing, talk to them to find out what they are doing and to look at, what could I do or be? What do I want to be when I grow up? I mean, I really didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up until I was in my 30s.
What do you see as the unique challenges and opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health researchers in addressing the health disparities faced by Indigenous communities?
A number of challenges. One is some structural challenges in terms of having the finances, the financial support to do the research in the first place. Second one is having a bit of a track record or knowing how to build a research team where even if you don't have the track record, the members on your research team coming behind you have got the track record that can help to mentor and support you. I mean, there's a lot more opportunities now for Aboriginal researchers than there were when we first started out. As you know, Heather, it was difficult. If you can, try and get a first paper written, because publications help in terms of giving you the authority to speak for the particular area that you might want to do research in. I think it's also a challenge for us is not to think that we know what the community needs, but to be in touch with our community, to talk to our elders, to talk to our community members, to talk to our practitioners around what's happening in this space. And of course, I think the other thing is being mindful of what is happening at the policy level and the national level in relation to particular areas of Aboriginal health. So, things like Close the Gap. What are the plan of closing the gap? What is the main areas that they're focusing on to bring about change? Because you have to link your research into what's going on both nationally and federally. You can get that support at that level. You're not seen to be operating in a vacuum. So some of the challenges is making sure that you're linked in, that you're talking to people, that you also get the support that you need. If you know someone who's been very successful in writing grants, ask them to give you help in terms of writing up your first research proposal, not being frightened to get feedback and not taking feedback personally, because it's not an indication there's something wrong with you. We have to be objective. The feedback can help us to rewrite and to finesse our application. So there are a few challenges, but, if you hang in there and you get your supports, and if you get your first rejection, don't let that shut you down. Go back to the drawing board and read the feedback, because that's what happened to me. My first rejection shut me down. And it took me a while to get my confidence to go back. We hear out in the community, we're not good enough, or we're this or we're that. So I think it's important to not let those things, don't take them personally, but to look at how that can make you stronger and your leadership as an Aboriginal researcher. Because, I hear from Aboriginal young researchers all the time, or Aboriginal workers who are wanting to do research. A lot of them have low self-esteem or don't believe in themselves, and yet they have a wealth of knowledge. And so it's around believing in yourself, and that the knowledge that you bring into the space is equivalent to the academic knowledge, because the academic knowledge can't go forward without the Aboriginal cultural knowledge.
Thank you, Dawn, for generously sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you for your support of Nurturing Knowledge, Indigenous Health Research Stories in Podcasts. This podcast is part of OCA's collective vision to develop the next generation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researchers. We hope you found inspiration in this episode. If you have any questions or would like to share your thoughts, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at www.ocanetwork.org or via email at oca@uq.edu.au. Stay tuned for more enriching stories to come.